Okay, so today we're going to talk about the dangers of duplicate content from an SEO perspective. Now, this is a relatively in-depth topic, so if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message or visit HQSEO.co.uk and we'll be happy to help you out. So, in this presentation, we're going to go through the dangers of duplicate content from an SEO point of view, what it is, how it was born, why it's bad for your search optimization, and how to deal with it as well. So, what is duplicate content? Well, it's a relatively easy thing to understand. It's basically something that exists exactly the same or applicable, similar to a piece of content that has already been published. Okay, aka a 100% or a 95% duplication. So duplicate content can be on your website or it can be on any third-party site. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to assume it has been on your site at some point. Now, there's multiple different types of duplicate content. Now, you have the really bad ones. These are things like spam websites, spam factories that just pull content from new websites before it gets indexed, which we'll talk about later on. And then they just basically repurpose or reserve this as their own content. Then you've got things like random content thieves. You've got things like admonger and scrapers and things like negative SEO maniacs. So basically, if your content doesn't get indexed before somebody else's, then they will be attributed by Google as having the primary source. And that's a bit of an issue, especially if your site is not very authoritative, because Google will state that you had the duplicate content even if you wrote it first. So we've seen this in a few cases with some smaller clients that published a blog post and then was stolen completely by a competitor. Because it was indexed first on their site, then they actually got credited with the initial resource and the other content didn't rank at all because it was seen as duplicate content. Usually that's not too common, luckily, but instead these things are really super common. So these are usually unintentional, but they need to be taken care of ASAP. So multiple web pages on the same domain having duplicate content. Now, this is a bit of a tricky topic from a technical search point of view because in some scenarios it doesn't actually impact your search as much as you think. Duplicate content is kind of a myth from that perspective, but in some cases it is really important, even just from a user experience and also from an overall crawl budget point of view. Now, crawl budget is essentially how much budget Google spiders weigh to your site. So if you have a very large site but there's tons of duplicate content, Google's not going to waste internal resources crawling a massive site that doesn't add any value. So that's the main danger with duplicate content, multiple web pages on the same domain. Then you've got things like republished content or unattributed guest posts. So if you go and do a guest post on someone's site and then that gets pulled to another site and doesn't get credited or doesn't get linked or canonicaled, then that's going to be a major issue just because, again, you're having duplicate content across the web and that may devalue that initial guest post that you did, which is obviously really annoying if you put in a lot of work to create a really good piece of content. And as a result, this is something that we recommend. Most people will attribute if they copy, such as in press releases and things like that, but occasionally this doesn't happen and it is pretty frustrating. The next one is just lazily copied stuff. You don't have to have 100% duplicate content. Sometimes you'll have maybe a writer that does a piece for you and it will turn out to be 30-50% the same as other pieces of content on the web. There's no data or stats on this, but again, it comes back to that crawl budget and adding value. If it's just copied from another source, just link to the source and don't copy it within a 20% duplicate content ratio or percentage. And then syndicated posts. This is very common in press. Now, as long as you have that link back to the original attributed source, it's usually a good thing. And from a link building point of view, you do also want to get that link back to your site. Say if it was a guest post and you had a link to a site or a client site, you do still want to have that in when your post does get syndicated because that's going to add a lot of link equity and link value. So how unintentional duplicate content is born. So this is pretty common, right? So this is published the same post in multiple places and Google will rank each instance in most cases. And as you can see here, it's usually going to rank the one with the highest domain authority first. So this is a quick example that we found around consumer behavior. And as you can see, it was the exact same article on LinkedIn and also on UK Essays. Now the problem with this is essentially you want your UKSAs.com site to rank, because in this case that would be the money site or the client site that they want to actually rank and then generate visitors to, and then close them through obviously content marketing, higher funnel keywords, which is obviously something they've targeted. But the problem is they've posted this onto LinkedIn as well. And even though LinkedIn was actually published after, if you have a look at the dates, we have December 13th and we have May 18th, both 2017, we can see that 6 months after didn't matter in the end, just because LinkedIn is seen as more of an authority, especially in the marketing business space as well. So that's the issues that you'll have. And usually the overall weight and quality of that UKSAs article in this case will decrease. So because we copied the exact terminology, you can see in bold, both came up. But if we only copied, say, the first sentence, you probably wouldn't even see UKSAs on page 1. And that's probably the major problem with duplicate content when it's yourself. So don't publish the same post in multiple places. Next, you've got things like bad URL structure, variations, domain variations, problems, content management systems. WordPress is not ideal for this scenario, but there are also a lot worse ones out there. But just as most people use WordPress, be aware of that. Okay. Now, ideally, you want to have something like your domain / awesome article, which is fine. But obviously, there's so many other structures of sites, as you can see here. You just need to be very, very careful that that same post isn't appearing multiple times. So we've got this example here. Okay, so we might have it in a category page of 2018. Now, if that gets indexed, that's classed as duplicate content. Now, Google is smart enough to realize that you just aren't quite sure from a technical SEO point of view or a technical search point of view. So they're not going to penalize you as such as they would with, you know, the more spammy methods or duplication of posts across different URLs. But this does actually take up your crawl budget again. And if you have the same post across 8, 10 URLs, it's just going to be weighing you down. We see this a lot in archives, as you can see here. We see this a lot in category pages. We see this a lot in date style pages. Okay. And even if you publish on a subdomain, make sure you're careful about this, and especially if you have multiple language-based sites. So make sure your hreflang is set up correctly, but also target each individual locational, I guess, subfolder of your site and write new content for each one. Okay, now you can stick to the same themes, but ideally you would want to have brand new content that's 80, 90, 100% unique. Okay, so the third one is e-commerce. So this is very, very common as well. This is actually a little bit easier to fix because we can use things like canonicals, but duplicate content across different category pages, subcategories, and product pages. So if we have a look at those examples there, you can see for example, best watch ever. If you copy your, say, product description to Amazon, the one that you use exactly on your site, what do you think is going to happen? Okay, so this is really a massive issue. We've actually done some funny tests with dropshipping recently. If you copy the exact dropshipping product description that AliExpress and websites that are super large and generally are the dropshippers themselves have, what you'll find is hundreds of sites actually copying and using the exact same thing. Okay, obviously these sites are not exactly the highest quality ones, but it is something to remember and be aware of, especially if you sell on multiple stores, multiple locations. Make sure you obviously write independent product descriptions for each one. And these don't need to be super long or super amazing, but they just need to be different. Okay, otherwise you'll have Amazon outranking all of your personal web properties, and that's not ideal from an e-commerce point of view, because obviously you have to pay the Amazon fees on top of, you know, any profit that you make. Okay, so we've got a few dangers here. Bad user experience is always one, that's pretty standard. Repetitive content, misleading URLs from SERPs, there's no real value there, and there's a loss of trust. So if a client is coming on your site or a customer is coming onto your site and they just see the same product description copied everywhere, obviously that's not great. Okay, or if they see the same article but it's just repurposed and it's 90 or even 50 to 80% the same, they're not going to be pre-sold on whatever it is you're offering, because if you can't solve a content issue, it's going to shine through as a, okay, they don't actually care about the service, even though in 99% of cases that's not actually the case. Then you've got technical SEO. This is incredibly annoying when this happens because, as I've mentioned before, it wastes your crawl budget massively. It does delay indexation, and Google may lose trust in your website. Okay, there's technical reasons why that would happen, but essentially think about it. If you're only copying posts from another website and you're not even linking back, and you're just saying this is a post, and Google's saying, well, this is copied from Forbes or LinkedIn or something else, you know, your site doesn't add any value, and as a result it shouldn't be ranked for anything because it's a spammy site. That's the angle that it goes down, and that's why duplicate content hurts so many sites nowadays. Okay, in terms of delayed indexation, it's similar to what we talked about before. So if you have, say, a guest post on another site that you've pulled directly from your piece of content, then what's going to happen is if that other site gets indexed first, there's no point in your website being indexed. Okay, Google doesn't want hundreds of the same URLs with the exact same content on. So what they're going to do is either not index you at all, which is obviously terrible, or delay it massively. Okay. Okay, so here's an interesting one as well. So your link profile actually gets watered down because important pages lose the previous backlink juice that they had. Okay, so obviously as a result, your organic search and rankings will be impacted. That's back to the indexation question as well. And also, if you're using duplicate content, you don't really have a linkable asset for outreach or any white hat link building as well. So in short, you know, you don't have a chance of generating any links. Okay, it's also against web practices. If we do look at what Google says in their terms of service, they basically say duplicate content doesn't rank and is terrible. Obviously, they're going to say that. A lot of what Google says is misleading. We'll use that terminology. But in this case, it does confuse the Google bots, and it just makes your website swell in size. So there's no actual added value for that additional size. And as a result, if you make life difficult for Google, Google will make life difficult for you. Okay. So as a result, like we said earlier, you're going to lose this SERP battle, even though you wrote this initial content on your site. Okay. It ranks above because two things actually. One, LinkedIn has more authority in this specific space, talking about business services, marketing, etc. And two, you have just copied that, or Google has think you have copied that from LinkedIn in this scenario. Okay. And if this person hasn't linked back to the original post, then that's pretty much kind of the worst thing you can do. Because at least when you link back, you get that link to a attributed source. And obviously the backlink is relatively powerful in and of itself, just because you're linking to a very relevant source. Okay. So in this scenario, don't copy all your new blog posts to LinkedIn. Okay. There are a few myths around this though. Duplicate content does attract Google penalties eventually. But honestly, if your site is too small, they just don't care enough. So Google is smart enough to locate the original source of an article, and they will attribute it internally. But in most cases, honestly, it's not worth the resources of the company. And that's why you see things like LinkedIn ranking above the site that was attributed, or the site that is originally posted the content. Google is obviously smart enough to tell spam from not spam. And as long as you aren't intentionally trying to influence the rankings with duplicate content, then minor duplicate content issues won't attract penalties pretty much ever. Okay, so occasionally you will get one, but as we've said here, it's pretty much a myth if you think that you'll always get one. And then obviously create value. That's the main one here. Google, from a technical search point of view and from a user experience point of view, wants to see valuable sites and URLs. If you're copying content that's not valuable, you should just be mentioning it and linking back as a resource. So dealing with the content. If you have this duplicate content issue on your own domain, what's the fix? Now the first is to do a content audit. So this is finding duplicate content and URLs on your site. Things like Screaming Frog, Copyscape, SiteLiner, and Search Console are all really good for this. Then take these URLs. If they add no value at all, delete the post and set up a 301 redirect. Okay. If they do add value and you want to keep them on the site, then you could introduce something called canonicalization. So this basically is very common when multiple product pages are on the same sort of site. If you have 100 different colors, you don't want each one individually re-indexed, because that'll be a massive amount of duplicate content, especially if you have thousands of products, hundreds of colors, dozens of sizes. You're going to have a really massive site that doesn't add any value. So canonicalization is basically a little piece of code that goes into each product page in this example, and will say to Google, hey, this is the real page you want to rank. Anything after this, please ignore. Okay, powerful piece of code, although Google officially doesn't actually have to pick that up, so they can still index canonicalized URLs. But generally it is a really good solution, especially for e-commerce stores. So on other domains, for example, disavow any really spammy or suspicious backlinks you have. Use Copyscape to find if your content is being pulled to other sources, and also use Ahrefs for this. And then you can actually submit the legal removal requests, but honestly, that is a lot of hassle. That's something that we haven't done. Most of the time, just avowing it or either leaving it if it's fine and just taking the hit is the best you can do. Just make sure there's nothing majorly dangerous coming from the duplicate content externally. So the best ways to implement this is just a regular check of your website. So for example, technical SEO audit. Regularly, every 6 months, we recommend a really in-detailed one, and then damage control via the SEO treatment that we mentioned before with the content audit. Even simple things like 301ing broken links, ensuring there's no link redirects. If there's any 404 pages, get them linked, get them 301'd as well, and just basically keeping your site very clean and always looking for duplicate content if you see anything happening from a decreased search exposure or organic search point of view. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, hqseo.co.uk. Link is in the description, and thanks for